In this video, we're going to look at how to form and use future time clauses. You're going to learn their form and function, and we're going to take a look at how to use after, as soon as, before, once, until, when, and while. Let's take a look at our first example. In this sentence here, we have a future time clause. The future time clause is this clause right here. Now, of course, by clause, we mean a subject and a verb combination. So here, I is the subject, go is the verb. The future time word here is before, and I'm going to call this the future time word. It is also called a subordinating conjunction. So before I go on my trip, I am going to research. The function of a future time clause, and we'll call this the FTC, the function of this future time clause is to let us know when this main clause is going to occur in the future. So in this clause here, and this is also a clause because we have a subject, I, and then we have am going to research. This is the verb, and that verb is in the simple future. So this main clause is going to happen, but the future time clause lets us know when that is going to happen. Now here we have, before I go on my trip, I am going to research the best places to visit. In this case here, when we look at this subject-verb combination, we see that this subject-verb combination, the verb in particular, is written in what tense? That's right, it's in the simple present. So this is very important to note. The future time clause is written in the simple present, and it lets you know when this is going to happen. So if we're planning a trip and someone asks me, well, when are you going to do some research about the best places to visit? I could answer, I am going to research the best places to visit when? Before I go on my trip. Now, what's very interesting about this is that even though this, before I go on my trip, is happening in the future, we still use the simple present. That's key to forming the correct and accurate future time clause. So if you can get that, you're really going to sound like a native speaker. So before I go on my trip, I am going to research. Another very important point is that when you have the future time word at the beginning of the sentence, we need to have a comma here at the end of the first clause. Now you might be wondering, when does the first clause end? How do I know it's over, the first clause, this future time clause? And the answer to that is when the next clause, subject verb, begins. So before I go, comma, I am going to research. We could also have that. Before I go, I am going to research. Or before I go on my trip. This is a prepositional phrase that is describing what type of going is occurring. So here, before I go on my trip, I am going to research. We have a full, correct, and accurate future time clause. So imagine that you are going on a trip to Asia in the future. Let's take a look at another future time clause that we could use. So in this case here, we also have a future time clause, but it looks a little bit different from the first example I showed you. In this case here, the future time clause is actually written at the very end of the sentence. So we have the future time word, we have the subject and the verb in the simple present. Now, at the beginning of this sentence, I'm starting with the main clause. this is the main clause, and this clause can stand alone. It has meaning on its own. I will watch a lot of videos. Now, when we take a look at the future time clause, I'll call this the FTC. The future time clause, if I say it alone, it doesn't have any meaning. So if I say to you, before I go, you'll ask me, what about before you go? What before you go? What will you do? So in this case here, this clause alone doesn't have its own meaning. However, it gives meaning to the main clause. So in the main clause, let's take a look. We have the subject, and then we have the verb, will watch. Now this is written in the simple future. So the simple future is here. I will watch a lot of videos sometime in the future. So here, in this case, the main clause stands alone, but this future time clause lets us know when this is going to happen. So imagine that you're going on a trip across Asia and you want to do a lot of research. So you watch a lot of useful videos before you go. So in this case here, this is letting you know when that main clause event is going to happen. Now what's very important here again is that this verb tense is written in the simple present. Okay? Even though that event is happening in the future, we still use the simple present in the clause. All right, let's take a look at some other examples. So in the first example, number 1, after we leave India, we will visit Japan. Let's take a look at the grammatical structure of this sentence and break it down. First of all, we have the future time word in the beginning position. Automatically, that means that we're going to have a comma here after the first clause. The future time clause is written with the subject and the verb, and this is in the simple present. When we take a look at the next clause, which is the main clause, we will visit Japan. And here we have the subject and the verb, will visit, in the simple future. So this is correct. Number 2, when we get to Vietnam, we'll try pho soup. So let's take a look at this. When we get to Vietnam, this is the future time clause. We have the future time word, when, in the beginning position, and we have the comma here. Next, we have the subject and the verb in the simple present. This entire future time clause is letting us know when this is going to happen. And the main clause, I'll call this the MC, the main clause is written in the simple future. We will try. Number 3, as soon as we land in Thailand. So here we actually have a future time phrase, as soon as. That means immediately. So one thing happens and then another thing happens very quickly, very soon after. So this in total is the future time phrase, we'll call it. We have the subject and the verb in the simple present. Because this is in the initial position at the very beginning, we have a comma here. In the main clause, we have the subject, we, and then are going to. We are going to. Now, in this case here, we are using the present progressive to talk about a future plan, and that is okay to do. So in this case here, we're going to the beach. Well, when are you going to the beach? As soon as we land in Thailand. Let's take a look at these examples. Now, one thing that you're going to notice with these examples is that the future time word is not at the beginning of the sentence. In these cases, we have the future time word in the middle of the sentence. So if I take a look at where these are located, we can see that they are in these locations. So after those future time words, we have the future time clause. So here we have the subject and the verb, we have the subject and the verb, and the subject and the verb. When we take a look at those subject-verb combinations, we see that those are written in the simple present. Okay, now one thing also that is important to note is that because all of these words, once, before, and until, are in the middle of the sentence, we do not have a comma in any of these sentences. Only when the future time word is at the beginning of the sentence do we have a comma between the two clauses. So in this case here, the future time clause, once we get to the hotel, all of this is the future time clause. The main clause here is I will call you. So we have the subject, and then we have the verb will call. Now, this verb tense, again, is written in the future simple, or the simple future. I will call you. When are you going to call me? You're going to call me once we get to the hotel. Okay, so again, the future time clause is letting you know when that's going to happen. Now, the meaning of once is very similar to as soon as. So it means that something happens first, we get to the hotel, and then immediately after that, I am going to call you. Okay? In the second example, I'll order the tickets before we get to the station. So before we get to the station, even though this is happening in the future, we still use the simple present, before we get, not before we will get to the station. Okay, so all of this future time clause is written in the simple present. Here is the main clause, and here we have I is the subject, will order is the verb. So I will order the tickets when? Before we get to the station, so that we're all prepared to get on the train. The third example here, we're going to be at the market until the sun sets. So in this case here, we have the future time clause, until is the future time word, the sun is the subject, and sets is the verb. This is all written in the simple present. The sun sets. We don't say the sun will set or the sun is going to set. When we take a look at this main clause, here we have the subject, we, and then are going to be. So all of this here is the simple future. Simple future. So this is going to happen in the future. And now the word until is kind of like a deadline. So we're going to be at the market until the sun sets. So imagine on a timeline that this is now, and now is the time of speaking. So we're saying the sentence now, but we're talking about the future. Okay? So let's say now is maybe 1 p.m. in the afternoon. And let's say that the sun is going to set at 7 p.m. So when we use the word until, it means that we are going to be at the market, but at 7 p.m., the sun is going to set. So at this time, we are not going to be at the market anymore, exactly at sunset. Okay, so we're going to be there, the sun is going to set, and then after that, we're not going to be at the market anymore. Maybe we'll return to the hotel. So let's take a look at these examples. All of these examples have future time clauses, and let's take a look at where they are located first. It's always very useful to be able to look at a sentence and break it down grammatically according to the important grammatical words in a sentence. So while we're hiking, when we're hiking, while we are hiking, and when we are hiking. So in this case here, while and when have the meaning that as one thing is occurring, the other thing is occurring simultaneously. So visually, imagine that this is now. In the future, you have one thing occurring and you have another thing occurring simultaneously. That is why we use while or when in these future time clauses. So here we have while we are hiking, when we are hiking. Now, what verb tense is this? Here we have the present progressive. While we are hiking, when we are hiking. Okay, so both of these cases use the present progressive. That is the verb to be, so in this case, are, plus the verb ing. Now we're using the present progressive to indicate that the action is occurring continuously. Okay, so in the future time clause, while we are hiking, we're using the present, but we're choosing to use the present progressive because it's more appropriate due to its continuous nature. So in this case here, we will take some photos while we are hiking. This is the main clause, and here we have the subject, and we have the verb will take. When is that going to happen? It is going to happen while we are hiking. Now, in the second example, this is exactly the same. The only difference here is that we have while switched for when. They have the same meaning. In the last two examples, here we see the future time word written at the beginning of the sentence. So we know after the first clause, we're going to have the comma. So in this case here, while we are hiking, here we have the future time word, the subject, and the verb. So in this case here, the verb again is in the present progressive. It's in present, not in the future. The main clause, we will take some photos. Here we have the subject, we, and then the verb, will take. In the fourth example, these again are exactly the same. We can choose while or when and keep everything constant. That's great, you got it. Now you understand more about future time clauses and how to use them. Check out the other useful grammar videos. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. And if you liked this video and got value from it, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. See you next time.